Morning. Hi, Iris. Morning.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Morning. Sorry, it's taken a while to start.
Never mind.
You okay?
Yes, thank you. And you?
Yeah.
Good, good.
One sec. Where is it? Oh, here we go. Come on.
Are you right to sit here? Fine.
Okay, is that Beryl?
Yes, it is. Good morning.
Hi. Morning. Whoops.
Good morning.
Right.
Morning, Pam. Morning, Beryl.
Okay.
Good morning.
Oh, hang on. I think I heard Iris.
Okay.
So,
Let me just do the Facebook thing and we'll start.
It's over there somewhere.
The nasty cough someone's got.
No, can't see it.
Okay, coming really done. Okay. Right. Oh, no. What have I done? All right. Too clever. Right. Can everyone see the slideshow?
Yes.
Okay. So it's slightly different this
I
week.
know, I'll deal with it if you move on.
We don't have a summary this week because we're dealing with Shavuos. So this week's material was compiled by Michael Rainsbury.
Oh,
Yes.
Did you do that?
No.
So we are indebted to him for putting it together. It's from one of the study shiurim that they put out from the Rabbi Sachs Legacy Trust. So now, how many covenants or how many times a covenant mentioned in the Torah?
I think you said 3, didn't you?
We did say 3, yeah. So there's the covenant with Abram, there's the covenant with Noah, and there's the covenant of Sinai. In the Parsha of Nitzavim, God restates his covenant again. And this is where it mentions those who are not standing there at Sinai, but actually everyone. What's the difference between a covenant and a contract? Let's see. Let's start. Rabbi Sachs, Morality, chapter 4. I guess, Iris, we should start with you, even though it's not the summary, because that's the established custom. So off you go.
Okay. In a covenant, 2 or more individuals, each respecting the dignity and integrity of the other, come together in a bond of love and trust to share their interests, sometimes even to share their lives, by pledging their faithfulness to one another, to do together what neither can achieve alone. A contract is a transaction. A covenant is a relationship. Or, to put it slightly differently, a contract is about interests. A covenant is about identity. It's about you and me coming together to form an us.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's number 1. Right? So covenant is more than a mere contract. It's a sacred relationship. Yeah. It's interesting. We refer to the ark as the ark of the covenant, right? Bris means a covenant. So it's a relationship. It's a commitment. It's an agreement. It's much more than just a contract. Okay. Next source. Who would like to read number 2?
Okay.
Go.
We have reached the Torah portion of Nitzavim near the end of the book of Devarim, in which Moses, at the end of his life, renews the covenant of Sinai some 40 years later with the members of the new generation.
Right. So obviously we haven't reached Nitzavim, we're at Bamidbar, but this is in that book talking about Nitzavim. Let's see what Nitzavim says. Julian, would you like to carry on?
Yeah. All of you are standing today before the Lord your God, the leaders among you, the tribes, the elders and officials, all the men of Israel, the children, the women, the strangers in your camp, from woodcutter to water drawer, to enter into the covenant of the Lord your God and the oath the Lord your God is making with you today, to establish you today as his people, that he may be your God, as he promised you and swore to your ancestors, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Not with you alone am I making this covenant and oath, with you who are standing here with us today, before the Lord our God, I make it, and with those too who are not with us here today.
Okay, so although this is from Nitzavim, right? So ostensibly this is, was it 40 years later?
Yeah, that's what it said, yeah.
Yeah. But we have the same idea at Sinai, that it wasn't just that generation, but it was basically all generations stood at Sinai, right? Okay, so let's just focus on the last part here, which says, not with you alone am I making this covenant. I should have made it bold. I should make it bold quickly. Just bear with me a sec. Oops, let's be slightly easier to see. Give me a sec. Right. See if this works. Come on. Okay, is it back?
No.
Oh, it's not sharing. Sorry, one sec. Share. Here we go. Right, so not with you alone am I making this covenant, but I make it though too with those who are not here with us today. Okay, so what do we assume that means?
All future generations.
Right, future generations. So what does that, what degree of, a person would say, it's not my fault my ancestors stood at Mount Sinai and told God Na'aseh v'nishma. I never consented, right? So what would our theological answer to that be?
You did.
Well, you did, because
Yes.
we have this concept that
Because
really,
it was
yeah,
all the future generations
right,
were part of this covenant.
right. So I suppose they could deny that, but right. So it's this idea that it's not just that generation that stood at Sinai, but it's for all generations. Right? We can understand that both literally and figuratively, that when our ancestors accepted the Torah, they said they would teach it to their children. Right? That was one of the reasons that God chose Abram. It says he would teach his children in his ways. Right? Little quick legal question. Is there a parallel to
The
this?
link and I forgot to press the button to send it to you.
Is there a parallel to this in secular law?
I would doubt it.
I would say 100% yes.
Oh, where's that then?
Insofar as
Yeah.
your estate, when you pass on after 120 years, your estate takes on any obligations that you made in your lifetime, financial commitments, yeah? And your heirs become liable. Yes?
I don't know.
Basically, your estate inherits your whatever obligations you have. I mean, you can have a situation.
Isn't it up to the up to each individual as to how they dispose, how they decide in their will is going to transfer on to whom? It's not automatic.
Yeah, but I'm saying the notion that an obligation I take upon myself might devolve to future generations. I mean, if a person is in debt, I'm not sure if your heirs can end up out of pocket, but certainly they could end up with nothing from your estate. I don't know if they can end up out of pocket. I suppose they could. Things like inheritance tax.
Especially with aristocracy. This is what happens with aristocracy. That's why they leave it to, the country.
Right.
They would completely eat up everything they've got, the inheritance tax.
Right. So I do know of a situation where somebody lost her husband relatively in his 50s or 60s. As it happens, she was Israeli, he wasn't Jewish, not necessarily relevant. And she had no idea that he had huge debts. And of course, I think they were probably in her name as well. So after he died, she suddenly found herself saddled with debt she didn't even realize. That's a slightly different situation. But as far as I understand inheritance, your estate takes on any obligation. So if your mortgage isn't paid off, then your heirs can't sell your house. They would have to pay off the mortgage. They would have the obligation. The estate, now they could, I suppose, say we don't want anything from the estate. But they would definitely have a concept that the obligations that a parent takes on might transfer to the child. I think we have a precedent for that. Anyway, certainly in Torah, we have that concept. So if your child turns around to you and says, I never committed to this, this is your choice. You would probably say to them, well, actually you did, because this is all of our inheritance. This is not just me, right? Our ancestors stood at Sinai and they accepted it for all the generations. And we have a tradition that we all stood there, whether that means literally or figuratively. Could be figurative insofar as we make choices for our children and grandchildren, right? I'm sure I've told the story before. There was once a chap that gave a talk at Limud. His sister had become very frum and was talking about their relationship and some of the challenges. And somebody asked if his sister's children get a secular education. He said very minimal. And then they said, but surely, that's wrong. And they started arguing. And Clive Lawton was there. And Clive said, let's be honest. He said, I'm quite liberal. He said, but let's be honest. We all make choices for our children. A person who's more, you say, ultra-Orthodox, whose child gets less of a secular education, or a person who's more secular, whose child gets no Jewish education. We all make choices based on our own biases and our own lifestyle choices for our children's education. That's a reality. Very unusual for someone to say, I believe passionately in this, but I will give my child a complete free choice. Unless it's those people who say, I'm not going to teach my child about Judaism, I want them to choose when they're 18. But that's not usually a committed person, right? So we all make choices for our children. So whether it's literally standing at Sinai or the notion that when they accepted the Torah, it was basically for future generations. So when your kids say, why do we have to do this? Why can't we go out Friday night? And you say, because your grandparents, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know what people say. People used to say, you're finishing Hitler's work for him. I don't know if they say that anymore. All these kinds of, hyperbole and things that people come out with. And the kids say, but, that was your choice, not ours. Okay, it's not quite so simple. Let's have a look. Let's just be clear on this, what the Midrash says about this. Who would like to read? 1 second. Number 4.
I will.
Go on.
Rabbi Abahu, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Said in the name of Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, why does it say, with you who are standing here, and with those too who are not with us here, omitting the word standing? Because all the souls were there, even though the bodies had not yet been created. Okay,
so Rabbi Abahu says it's a spiritual thing, that even if your physical body wasn't at Sinai, your neshama stood there. Rashi has a slightly more sort of, I say, rational explanation. Let's see Rashi, who wants to read the next one. Careful, Brenda, you want to read?
Yes, with those who are not here, even with generations yet to come.
Right, the Torah doesn't waste words. The Torah just said, all of you standing here. Why did it say all of you standing here? And even those who are not standing here, it's a very important point that includes the generations yet to come. So far, possibly so good, or possibly not. Okay, I sort of gloss over an obvious question. How can I take an obligation upon myself for my children, right? Is that really for me to do? I hereby pledge that my children, my descendants for all eternity, will vote for the Labour Party. Well, you can't do that, right? You can't even really realistically pledge that your kids will keep Shabbos or kosher. They do what they want, right? So what does that even mean?
If you don't give them the opportunity to learn, and you just say, well, let them make them in their own decisions, Well, they can't. You need to show them something.
Yeah, but look, right, if I go live in Israel because I want to make Aliyah, because I'm a passionate Zionist, and I raise my children in Israel, and like many Israelis, they become a bit indifferent to, or even stressed out by Israeli society, and they actually say, you know what, you grew up in England, is much quieter, much safer, I want to move to England. I say, how can you do that? We left England out of ideology. And they'll turn around and say, you left England out of ideology, we didn't. Right? If I would say to my children, people often say, you think your children will become rabbis? I don't know. If I would say to them, well, we made a choice to go into the rabbinate, you have to make the same choice, because it's a very noble thing to do. You're a doctor. Does your kid have to be a doctor? No, clearly not. You can't make a commitment for your child, right? We all like it if our children do things that we find personally, I'm musical. I like it when my kids play musical instruments, but I wouldn't force them to do it, right? Obviously, it's slightly different with Yiddishkeit. We have much stronger kind of wishes and desires for that. It's something that we want our children to do because it's something very important, like values, right? If you raised a child to be honest and you then found out they were, defrauding whatever, their employer, you'd be very disappointed in them. But there's an interesting legal question here. The legal question is this, right? The obligation to perform a mitzvah, the legal duty, the legal obligation to do a mitzvah is not some esoteric spiritual thing. It's a real obligation, right? And therefore we find there are legal loopholes, right? If you are unwell or you can't fast on Yom Kippur, these are legal things. They're not pie in the sky spiritual. My soul was there, but my body wasn't, right? You must fast on Yom Kippur even if you can't, because your soul will fast even if your body doesn't. No, the reality is the legal rulings we have, right? If you feel ill, right? We don't say you need to pray harder. We say you need to see a doctor. So we are physical beings. So the obvious question is, if we're physical beings, you're talking about accepting the Torah and the obligation of the Torah. If you want to say God made a covenant with us and with future generations, and we all stood at Sinai, all our souls, and we were all there spiritually, and we all have a connection. That's very beautiful. When you talk about doing mitzvot, you talk about obligations. How can you say that? How can you accept obligations for someone's not even there, physically born yet? Even if you say their soul exists, they're not a physical person. They can't do a mitzvah. The Talmud says that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, after he passed away, used to come back every Friday night and make Kiddush for his family, right? So leaving aside the first part of that, there's a fierce debate about that, where even if you accept the first part, when you go to a cemetery, you tuck your tzitzit in. Why? Because the people there can't do mitzvahs. So for you to have your tzitzit out is like saying, ha, 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 look at us, we can do mitzvahs and you can't. So if people are exempt from mitzvahs if they're dead, then they no longer have any legal status. How can someone make Kiddush? That's a bit bizarre, right? So the Akedah Yitzchok has this question. Let's see. Who would like to read number 6?
I'll read that. The obligation to perform mitzvot requires both body and soul. Since Halacha Jewish law teaches that obligations cannot be imposed upon anyone unless he is present and expresses his consent. How much more would the consent of someone be required that had not even been born at the time the obligation had been imposed upon him?
Okay, right? So it's a good question, right? Person could say, okay, some people are like carbon copies of their parents, but it's quite a lot of people in today's generation who are more or less religious than their parents, right? You can have, in fact, this does happens a lot in the sort of Baal Teshuvah scene, that you have a couple who have become more religious in later life. Maybe their kids initially weren't, and perhaps in their teens they've started keeping Shabbos, and there's a certain tension there that the parents just want the kids to go along with what they're doing, and the kids say, but we have our own lives, type of thing. It's more likely to occur where changes have happened later on in life. But you can have it even, let's say somebody's become very frum and they've had a bunch of kids, and one of the kids is not as frum as the parents, and the parents say, how can you do this? They say, what do you mean? You went in a different direction from your parents, and we've gone a different direction from our parents. Happens all the time. Right? People say, how could you vote Labour? Your father would be turning in his grave. Okay, we're different people. How could you be this? How could you be that? How could you, I don't know, be Zionist or anti-Zionist or go live in this place or whatever it is, right? And people say, look, you have to lead your own life at the end of the day. We can't always do everything. We talk a lot about tradition. 4 years ago, we say that our parents entrusted us with the task of passing on the Torah to our children. I do always wonder, some people turn around and say, actually, my parents didn't teach me anything. This is a path I chose for myself. If I'd listened to my parents, I'd be a communist, so it's not always that straightforward. So this is the Akedah Yitzhak's question. How can you take an obligation on someone else's behalf? I obligate my children to ... How can you do that? You can say our family believes in this and we like to try to do this, and it's, you can't have an interesting discussion with an older son of a rabbi about attending minyanim, right? If you grow up and you're the child of a rabbi, then it follows that whilst most normal teenagers don't get out of bed at 6 o'clock during the holidays, there's an unspoken expectation that you'll get to minyan for 6:40 in the morning during the holidays. Right? I struggled with this when we had the early minyan. Do I wake my kids for minyan? Do I not wake them? At the end of the day, they're normal teenagers. And thank God they daven every day, but they may not want to get up at the crack of dawn during the school holidays. On the other hand, shouldn't I set an example? Of course, my children should come to minyan with me. If I was a regular person and not a rabbi, I'd want to do that. So isn't that a normal thing to do? So the answer is probably lies somewhere in the middle. It's good for kids to know that they make a difference. And if they show up to the minyan, they may well be the minyan man. On the other hand, you can't put too much pressure on people. But we do that all the time. Some professions, including my own, your children are very much in the spotlight. Child could turn around to their parents and say, I never asked to be raised in a very public manner where everyone can see what I'm doing all the time, and I can't just have a normal day where I don't go to shul one day or I go to a different shul, or whatever it is. Right? We all make choices for our children. But it's a nice legal question. The child turns around and says, I didn't make this choice, you did. So the Akedah Yitzchak, who is Rabbi Yitzchak ben Moshe Aramai, I don't know when he lived, he sounds Sephardi, he raises this issue. It's very nice, all these midrashim about how all our souls stood at Sinai, and you could say even just in kind of metaphorical terms, where as parents we make lifestyle decisions that affect our children. But we talk about acceptance of mitzvot, which is what Shavuot is about. We accepted the Torah. How can I accept something how can I commit my future generations? They're going to make their own choices. Right?
And they do.
They do. So, going back to the previous two sources, do we really, according to the previous sources, right, the Midrash says that the souls were there. Rashi says that basically the covenant is with all generations to come. Is Torah optional for us? Is there any difference between us and the first generation that stood at Sinai?
No, not
No,
really. No.
right? According to them, no. According to the Akedah Yitzhak, he says it's not so simple. He says that there's a consent issue here. How did you consent? So the question is, it's very nice the original generation that stood at Sinai felt the powerful bond, and they felt this compulsion to come close to God. They lived and they experienced it. And according to the Midrash, we were also there on the spiritual level. But is that enough to say to a person in 2023, you can't work on Shabbos, or you can't this, you can't that, or you should do this or that? So I don't think it's a somewhat legal question, right? Theologically, philosophically, we understand Judaism is all about continuity. It's about passing it down to the next generation. But it's a reasonable question the next generation could ask, right? Who made this choice for me? Right. We know that we're obsessed with lineage, right? Your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish. Often get asked when I go to speak to non-Jewish school groups, people say, what made you decide to become Jewish? I say, no, it doesn't work that way, right? It's something that if you're raised in a Jewish family, then you're considered Jewish if your mother's Jewish, and you will probably follow Jewish tradition. And if not, then not. So we all do that to our children, essentially. Let's look at Rabbi Sachs, continuation of the previous source. Who would like to read?
I will, if you like.
On.
Judaism is a religion of continuity. It depends for its very existence on the willingness of successive generations to hand on their faith and way of life to their children, and on the loyalty of children to the heritage of their past. So when in the past Jews asked why they should continue to be Jewish, what was the answer?
So let's just qualify that for a moment. Anyone remember the very beginning of the book of the Tanya, where it starts off and it says in the Midrash that in the Gemara, that before a soul comes down to this earth, it says Mashbir Mosai Tzadik Al Rasha. They take an oath. Anyone remember this from years ago from Rabbi Abrams? I don't think we've done it since then. Chapter 1 says a person takes an oath that you must be a tzaddik and not a rasha. Right? So the Talmud tells us that a soul, before it enters a body in this world, is basically charged with the promise to be righteous. So the question is asked on that. How can you make an oath that you have to be righteous? Surely we have free choice. Some people are righteous, some people are not. How can you, right? And you take an oath, what, in God's name? I swear by mighty God to be righteous. How does that work if you're not righteous? Right? And one of the explanations is that it's not quite so much a case of you promise to do it. And it even says it's a play on words. Shavuot, mashpia is an oath, like Shavuot, right? Is also weeks or oaths. Shavuot is an oath. And if you change the shin to a sin, which we sometimes do when we're playing around with words, you get soveya, posea ches yadecha, he opens his hands, umaspia l'chol chayratzon, and he satiates, he gives food. So one of the explanations is that when it says mashpia moso, that we make this child, this soul, swear to be good, it doesn't so much mean that they have to promise to be good, but rather mashpia moso, we give them enough, we give them the chizuk, we give them the strength, we give them a boost by saying be good, right? God gives them a boost and says, I'm charging you with being good. God, am telling you, you're going to be good. So there's a suggestion, we'll go back to Kedah Yitzchak in a minute, in Nitzavim, when it talks about an oath today, that you stand here and you take an oath, you swear allegiance, right? Oh, they have this with the coronation, right? This new thing that you swear allegiance to the king and his descendants, yeah? Right? Did anyone see that story?
Yeah.
So the phrasing of the oath of allegiance, which people were encouraged to take, was not just to the king, but to his descendants as well, which by the way includes Harry and Meghan, I think, right? So people say, how can you do that? How can you commit now? It's a kind of a slightly similar thing. So what you might answer is, I'm not going to literally, it doesn't mean that in 50 years' time, if, I don't know, what's the oldest one? George? George the oldest one? Prince George, is it? I think
so.
No?
Yes.
So George the, whatever it will be, what is he? Sixth?
George.
Fifth?
George,
Fourth?
it's definitely George.
So George is king one day, and somebody walks down the street and they see you burning a Union Jack flag. I don't know if you're allowed to do that legally in this country. And in America, it's a constitutional right. Anyway, someone sees you doing it, and they say, wait a minute, 50 years ago, you took an oath of loyalty and allegiance to King Charles and his future descendants. I'm now arresting you for treason. You say, whoa, slow down. I didn't quite mean it like that. It was an expression of, we love you, King Charles. You know, it wasn't unconditional. So we all do things like that. We pledge our loyalty or allegiance, right? Is it for eternity with no preconditions? Or is it a way of sort of expressing our commitment without being quite so much of a legal thing? So in the same way that says that when the soul comes down to earth and it's told, you must swear to be good, that one interpretation is it doesn't so much mean you have to promise like an oath, but more, we charge you with the mission of being good. So here, can I take on an obligation for my children and grandchildren? No. Can I accept a sort of a mission? Can I accept a task to make sure that I will do my utmost to make sure that not just I, but my future generations will uphold the Torah? That I can do. We do that all the time. Right? We volunteer our kids for things. So this is what the Akedah Yitzchak has to say, because he's the one that raised the legal question, right? Midrash and Rashi just say everyone was there, quite literally or figuratively. The souls, future generations. The Akedah Yitzchak said, how can you, based on a sort of, I want to say a fairy tale, I don't mean that rudely, but something which is more of a fairy tale, how can you obligate people legally? So he says, I'm not sure that's quite the way we're going. But we're saying, like Rabbi Sachs says, that Judaism depends on passing it down to your children, their heritage. So it's this idea of preservation of heritage. So let's see what the Akedah Yitzchak says. It's a little bit of a slightly peculiar wording, but who would like to read number 8? Are we back to Iris? Anyone not read?
Okay, if you like. The crucial aspect of the eternal nature of the covenant is that just as mass suicide committed by a whole people simultaneously is unthinkable, so the alienation of the entire Jewish people from its Torah and its God simultaneously is equally beyond the realm of possibility. Just as God had promised never to bring another flood, since conditions would not be allowed to recur which would call for such mass extinction, so conditions allowing a total rupture between Israel and its God would also not be allowed to recur. This is what the oath in our Parsha wishes to convey.
So this is what the Akedah Yitzchak says about basically Nitzavim, about this promise, this covenant. He says that it's basically a promise of continuity. It's not so much that you have to argue whether legally I can obligate my children or not. It's a bigger picture. The bigger picture is that Judaism depends on us passing on to the next generation, right? And if the whole generation would be separate from God and Torah, Judaism would end. It's unthinkable. How do we make sure that doesn't happen? So God says, I'm promising you now, this covenant will be eternal. I give you my promise. I give you my strength, my blessing. I give you chizuk. I give you encouragement that this covenant will be eternal. So is that a legal obligation, or is that more of a kind of, a moral duty to pass it down? The Akedah Yitzchak says it's not about the legal obligation, because he raises the question on that. How can I obligate my children legally to something? That's when we're talking about why we do mitzvahs. We wouldn't say you do mitzvahs because legally we're obligated because our ancestors accepted the Torah at Mount Sinai. So we do mitzvahs because we want the Torah to get passed down to the next generation. It's not so much an argument of legal technicality as something bigger than that. The Abarbanel has a much simpler explanation. Let's see what he has to say. Who would like to read number 9? Julian.
Therefore, our sages said that every Jew has been sworn into the covenant since Mount Sinai, since that was when we entered into the service of God, and all descendants have the same obligation. The children were obligated and included into the covenant made by their ancestors, not because of the oath that they made, but because they accepted upon themselves being servants to God when he took them out of the land of Egypt.
Interesting. He says a few things. He says they took upon themselves servitude, but they took it on because basically, as we say, right, if God hadn't redeemed us, we and our children's children would have all been slaves in Egypt. When someone is rescued, we say it's not just them, it's the future generations. Like people like to meet the grandchildren of somebody that rescued their grandfather during the Holocaust. It's very emotional. So the Abarbanel comes in a slightly different way. He says, it's very simple. He says, the reason our children are obligated is because it's basically all flows from the same point. Because God redeemed us and took us out of Egypt to commit to serving him at Sinai, ergo, our children went on the same journey. If we hadn't left Egypt, they wouldn't have left Egypt. That simple, really. So that's our obligation. If I'm understanding him correctly, he's not even saying our obligation is because we stood at Sinai. He's saying our obligation is because God did a favor for our ancestors, our forefathers, and that has an effect on us. Right? Someone says, your grandfather gave my grandfather a job, and because of that, now my family can afford blah, 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 and we'll be eternally grateful, that kind of thing. Right? Which we do find in society. So, question. We've got the Akedah Yitzchak who says that this oath is not a legal obligation. He gives this rather strange analogy of you wouldn't have a whole people commit mass suicide, and in the same way you wouldn't have people commit mass alienation from Torah and God. There's always going to be a connection, and that's what this, when it says that you stand here today and you are servants to your God, it's basically a statement of commitment. It's reflecting the idea of Jewish continuity rather than a technical legal obligation. You've then got the Abba Noah says, no, he says, look, God saved us from slavery in Egypt, and therefore his descendants have to be, our descendants have to be his servants. How does that sit with modern society?
Don't think it sits very well, because people are all for freedom of choice and everything, aren't they?
Autonomy, freedom, personal choice, right? You must marry someone Jewish. Well, I make my own choices in life, and at the end of the day, I'm not going to be dictated to just because my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, etc.
And there's an overlay of secular laws which might be at variance.
Absolutely. I think we would, as a society, we would probably balk at the idea that our paths are chosen for us by our parents, ultimately. Right? To be fair, even in the Jewish world, they would say that. If you're going to argue everyone should follow the same path as their parents, no one should ever become more religious. Right?
No, but it's birth, isn't it? You're chosen your path through birth. You're born Jewish. You can't help that. You're born Jewish.
Well, plenty of people will
Your
say
path has been chosen for you.
and plenty of people say it's an accident of birth. I might be technically Jewish, but it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not practicing. I always remember a chap called me up and he said, my mother, I'm calling up about my mother's stone. So my mother was Jewish. I said, sorry? He said, what's the problem? I said, well, usually if someone's mother was Jewish, they would describe themselves as Jewish. He says, well, I sort of converted to Christianity. I don't really, don't follow any of the Jewish stuff. Okay, really strange conversation. Or once a chap said to me, my parents were Jewish refugees. So again, I thought, like, you didn't say my parents were refugees. My parents were Jewish refugees. So what are you? So he doesn't see himself as practicing. He knows that technically he's Jewish by accident of birth, but it's not relevant to him. Right? There's lots of people like that.
Really? Oh, okay. Okay, I mean, it's like that royal. You're born royal, you're born royal, and
that's controversial as well. So I think the answer is a lot of people would say that this is where we probably divulge from.
Diverge.
What's the word? Diverge, thank you, not divulge. Diverge from modern society, because we do have a very strong traditions, a very strong heritage that we want to preserve. So that's the reality. Why do we say that? So there's various explanations. One explanation is that it says we all stood at Sinai, so our souls felt this, the giving of the Torah. The other is that we're obligated because our forefathers were taken out of Egypt. Or don't read too much into this language that if we go back to, what did it say? Let me just see the phrase again. The oath the Lord your God is making with you today to establish you as his people, that he may be your God, and you promise to follow his Torah, and your children say to you, I never made that promise, you made that promise. You say, number one, we believe that we all stood at Sinai together, future generations included. Number two, we all make choices for our children, whether they like it or not. Right? If I'm a vegan, I don't know too many vegans that say I made a choice to be a vegan, but I'm going to offer my children the choice to eat meat because I don't believe they should be, constrained by my choices. If you're a vegan, you won't have meat in the house, right? If one of your kids grows up and wants meat, either you'll shout at them or they'll have it out of the house, right? We all make choices like that for our kids.
You've been placed on hold. Please wait.
Ooh, placed on hold. Right. We all make choices all the time for our children, unless you're a very honest person, a very open person, and you say, look, this is something that your parents feel passionate about. We recognize is not for everyone. So we're not asking you to also.
You've been placed on hold. Please wait.
Again.
Just move. I do know of people, by the way, for example, let's say I know someone, for example, who they had a family member who wasn't well. And when someone's not well, people take on different things. People say, I'm going to be more careful about kashrut or davening every day. So the person sort of made not a vow, whatever you call it, a resolution that they would be extremely strict about kashrut. And I don't know exactly what happened. Eventually, the relative didn't make it through the illness. But this person, to this very day, is very, very, very strict, stricter than their husband or their children. But it's something they do for themselves. So like they'll only a very specific, very small sort of selection of hechsherim, let's say. But it's not something they turn around to their kids and said, we can only buy this, that, and the other. They personally are very discerning what they eat because this is something they took on for themselves. Right? Most of us don't do that, though. Most of us, we make lifestyle changes, or we make religious decisions. They end up affecting our children. That's the reality, and our grandchildren. Right? In whatever way it is. Listen, if you weren't Shomer Shabbos and you decide to start keeping Shabbos, that also affects your children and grandchildren because you can't go around to them anymore if they're on the other side of London. You know, it works both ways. Right? That is part of life. So in Judaism, it's much more than that. It's basically our recipe for survival. Is that we do have this expectation that future generations will feel the same obligation that we did, that our parents passed on to us from all the way back. You know, it's not very politically correct. Let's see what Ezekiel had to say. This is an interesting one. Who would like to be Ezekiel?
I'll read that.
Go on.
That which is your thoughts will never be. You say, we will be like the nations, like the families of the land, serving wood and stone. As I live, declares the Lord God, with a strong hand, with an outstretched arm, and with an outpouring of fury, I will rule over you.
Right, so this is a slightly negative prophecy, right? Ezekiel said, let's see, according to Rabbi Sachs. Shall we carry on, Jeff? Go on, the message.
Yeah. The message of Ezekiel was conveying this. Jews might try to assimilate, but they would never succeed. History would conspire to prevent it. Jews would find that even though they converted, they were still regarded as Jews.
Right. So God tells Ezekiel that as much as you think you're going to become like the nations, you're going to assimilate, it's not going to happen. I will rule over you and you'll still be my people, right? And in fact, we see this through history, right? That whenever we get too comfortable, usually something happens that reminds us, right? Jeremy Corbyn, right? Anglo Jewry is relatively settled. Well, chief rabbis we have in the House of Lords, and we have lots of, influence, and society is not anti-Semitic anymore. And then you have someone who almost became prime minister who's anti-Semitic. And it shook people up. So I don't know if he almost became prime minister, but could have become prime minister, right? So we look throughout history, right? Look at Germany. So unfortunately, that's been the historical experience, is when we do think we can shake it off, it never works. As they say nowadays, we will always get othered by somebody. That's what they call it, the verb, right? Okay. Let's see what Rabbi Sachs has to say on this. Small print. Who's good at small print? Any lawyers here? Small print?
Oh, okay, I'll read a bit. It's a bit small, but anyway.
You can zoom it. Do you know how to zoom?
Sorry?
Do you know how to make it bigger?
No,
You should be able to zoom. Let me see if I can do it. 1 second. That's too big.
Too big.
1 second. Bear with me. Let me figure this out. How do I? Oh, there we go. Oh no, it's that.
Okay. Oh
no, never mind. Okay,
never mind. Never mind.
Yeah.
Not every obligation that binds us is one which we have freely given our assent. There are obligations that come with birth. The classic example is the crown prince or princess. To be their heir to the throne involves a set of duties and a life of service to others. It is possible to neglect these duties. In extreme circumstances, it is even possible for a monarch to abdicate, but no one can choose to be the heir of the throne. That is a fate, a destiny, and comes with birth. The people to whom God himself said, "My child, my firstborn Israel," Shemot 4.22, knows itself to be royalty. That may be a privilege, it may be a burden. It is almost certainly both. It is a peculiar post-Englishian type
enlightenment
delusion to think that the only significant thing about us are those we choose. For the truth is that we do not choose some of the most important facts of ourselves, about ourselves. We do not choose to be born. We do not choose our parents. We do not choose the time or place of our birth, yet each of these affects who we are and what we are called on to do.
Right. By the way, there were kibbutzim where children lived in shared dorms, right? And they didn't have like individual parents raising them. So there are people who have gone down the route of saying, you know, we have to be communal. But the reality is we are all shaped by these things, right? So it's the old question, chosen people, chosen for persecution or chosen for privilege. As Rabbi Sachs points out, right? God says, my firstborn Israel, right? It can be a privilege or it can be a burden. Right? What does he say? It's a post-enlightenment delusion to think that, you know, we get to choose the things that are most important to us. As he says, we don't. Right? Where you're born, what society, what culture, what community, what family, these are quite important things that shape your life, and yet you have no say over them. Right? Basically. So what we seem to be saying is that, you know, if you would turn around to a child of this generation and say, why should you be Jewish? Well, we believe that you stood at Sinai and you accepted the Torah just like everyone else. There is that idea. I would also say that even if we don't go down that route, the simple idea that, yes, our lives are shaped by our upbringing, our traditions, our history, our heritage, our community, our religion. It's naive to think they're not. We are all products of our environment. So it's not so far-fetched to say that because our parents did this, we do this. It's not so far-fetched. It's not such a terrible thing. And Rabbi Sachs points out, we do have certain birth obligations we're born with. That's not a very politically correct notion, no. So, one second. Now I'm going to contradict everything, right? God says, I place a choice before you, right? Who'd like to read number 13? Who hasn't read for a while?
I don't mind if nobody else wants to.
Yeah.
I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you today. I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Choose life so that you and your children may live.
Right. So 1 second. So choose. God says choose. Not I'm holding the mountain over you like a whatever. I'm going to crush you under it, but choose. So which is it? Which is it?
It's not much of a choice if you've got a mountain
yes.
above your head.
No. So let's see.
Of course you're going to choose whatever will stop the mountain from falling on you.
Right. Well, you say that, but people still make stupid choices in their lives, don't they? That they know are self-destructive. Let's see what Rabbi Sachs says. I'll read this. Choose life. No religion, civilization has insisted so strenuously and consistently that we can choose. We have it in us, says the Rambam, to be as righteous as Moshe or as evil as Yerovam. We can be great or small. We can choose. Choice is like a muscle. Use it or lose it. Jewish law is an ongoing training regime in willpower. Can you eat this and not that? Can you exercise spiritually 3 times a day? Can you rest once a week? Can you defer the gratification of instinct? To be a Jew means not going with the flow, not doing just what everyone else does because they're doing it. It gives us 613 exercises in the power of will to shape our choices. That is how we, with God, become co-authors of our lives. So says Rabbi Sachs, actually, it is a choice. Right? We might say we're obligated by the covenant, but the reality is we're constantly asked to choose what food we eat, what food we don't, what days we work, etc. Right? Unless you feel so obligated by your grandparents' choices that you never even go through the thought process as to whether you have any choice in these things. Right? And some people may not. Some people may feel, right, the same thing that some princes will feel born into royalty and it's not even a question. Others clearly struggle with that, like Harry. So, yeah. It's a choice, says Rabbi Sachs. It's a choice. You have to make the right choice, but it is a choice. Even for the next generation, we say there's a covenant with God. It's still a choice. Let's see. Choose life. Nothing sounds easier, yet nothing has proved more difficult over time. People choose substitutes for life. They pursue wealth, possessions, status, power, fame. And to these gods, they make supreme sacrifice. They realize too late that true wealth is not what you own, but what you're grateful for. That the highest status is not to care about status. Influence is more powerful than power. That is why, though few faiths are more demanding, most Jews at most times have stayed faithful to Judaism, living Jewish lives, building Jewish homes, and continuing the Jewish story. That is why, with a faith as unshakable as it has proved true, Moshe was convinced that not with you alone am I making this covenant and oath, with those who are not with us today. Why Judaism? Because there's no more challenging way of choosing life. So Rabbi Sachs says, when Moshe says, I'm not making this covenant only with you, but with future generations, he's not necessarily saying I'm legally obligating future generations. He might not even just saying that, I'm giving you a boost, I'm giving you chizuk. He's saying future generations will honor this covenant because that's what Judaism is, and it will continue to appeal to future generations. It's a slightly different twist on it, interesting way of looking at it. Let's hear his conclusions. Who would like to read the last 2 slides? Anyone?
I'll read
Shall I
it.
read it?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Somebody else.
Yeah. The fact that any of us is born a Jew is no mere fact. It happened because more than 100 generations of our ancestors decided to be Jew and hand on that identity to their children, thus writing the most remarkable story of continuity ever known. Nor was this mere
Happenstance.
happenstance. It flowed from their most basic conviction that Jews had entered into a covenant with God that would take them on a journey whose destination lay in the distant future, but whose outcome was of immense consequence for humankind.
Carry on.
I'm a Jew because, knowing the story of my people, I hear their call to write the next chapter. I continue their journey because, having come this far, I may not let it and them fail. I cannot be the missing letter in the scroll. I can give no simpler answer, nor do I know of a more powerful one.
Right, so don't ask, did you legally obligate your children because they were or were not standing at Sinai? Don't ask, how can we, what about my individual rights? I would say it's very simple. We see the incredible power of Judaism, the power of Jewish continuity. How can you not be impressed? How can you not hear that voice? How can you not want to be part of that chain? Right? It might not be politically correct. Your parents made decisions and choices for you. Okay, whatever. But the reality is these are good choices. They're the best choices. Maybe that's the message. The message is there may be choices, but they're good ones. So don't get upset. In the same way you wouldn't complain that your parents raised you to be, I don't know, have basic personal hygiene or, basic manners. You hope that your parents will raise you with Judaism as well, because it's part of your DNA. It's not that you're obligated, you're not obligated. It's what we want to do. Like even if you probably ask the most from people, do you raise your kids this way because you feel a deep sense of obligation from Sinai, or because it's a meaningful life for you that you want your children to continue? I think most people would probably say the latter. Of course, on some level, there's an obligation. We committed to Torah. We have to keep it. But it's more than that. It's meaningful as well. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't do it. Even those of us who do it out of obligation, hopefully find it meaningful as well. So there we go. Some thoughts for Shavuos, and thank you to Michael Rainsby for putting all that together.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm putting the last 2 bits, that last section in the newsletter as well.
Oh, very good.
Oh, is that from that work is done?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realise. I missed the beginning of the class.
Yeah, it's one of the essays they put out from the Rabbi Sachs Trust for Shavuot.
Yes. Yeah, I knew he'd
There we
done it.
go.
I haven't read it yet.
It's very nicely done. A lot of quotes from Rabbi Sachs's books as well. So next week we'll do Naso, hopefully. Reminder that there's a power hour on Zoom tomorrow night, 8:15. So please tune in for that. And obviously various learning going on over Yom Tov. Good morning to Reb Mordechai, our resident whiskey expert. Hi. All right.
When's Ben Dov talking?
Tikkun Leil on Thursday night.
Oh, good. Yeah. Do
Dom-
we have to book in for Tikkun Leil?
No. You just need to book for lunch, so we know how many people to make lunch for on Shabbos day.
Yeah.
Tikkun Leil, probably, I think second day during the sermon slot, we'll do like 10 minutes of learning, and then like basically between the courses at lunch, he'll do a share of some kind, 20 minutes, half an hour. Yeah, he's very good, actually. The reason I asked him is over the years, when he's been with us for Shabbos, he's often given Divrei Torah, like the student things, and it's always it's just right. It's engaging, it's interesting, it has, tochen to it, has content to it, but it's very easy to listen to. I said to him, he said, nah. I said, yeah, no. I said, you've got a nice style and been an educator for B'nai Akiva and things for years. He's got a connection to the area, so it's very nice. So we're very excited. Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Oh.
And Rabbi, who's speaking on the second day at Debbie's? Is it you or Esther?
It's going to be Esther.
Oh, nice. So is there something that I can advertise to the women?
Yes, one second, I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I may have it, but
I know, but you do it. You
I'll
have
let
yours in
Rabbi
a
send it,
different
yeah.
way.
Right.
I prefer it as a WhatsApp if that's possible.
I will do that now. No problem.
Thank you.
Well, where do the men go? Do they don't go
Our
to-
house. They can come to our house and sit at Julie, be with Julian.
Okay.
Keep him
Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't say that on the poster.
I know.
Okay.
I know. It's just
No, but-
an informal arrangement by
I've
custom.
put it on the wrong group. Whoops. Sorry. Just put it on the wrong group. I'm always doing things like that. Okay, just bear it. Yeah, I'll send it to you now. Okay, so have a good Yom Tov, everyone, for those that we're not seeing also.
And you, Rabbi.
And, we'll see you hopefully, if not next week, before then. If not before then, next week, whichever way around. Right, I'm going to
Okay.
stop. Have a good week, everyone.
Have a good
Well,
week.
Yeah.
Thank
And you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi. Everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.